You're listening to In-Fisherman Storyline, North America's top voice in multi-species freshwater angling. Here is your host, Thomas Allen.
Hey, welcome to another edition of In-Fisherman Storyline. This is another new one. There's a lot of new things we're doing with this. We're going to take an inside look, pull the curtain back, if you will, and get some insight from the experts in the In-Fisherman office here at Brainerd. We're going to talk about magazines. We're going to title this the Hardcopy edition. And we're not going to just talk about magazines. We're going to talk about TV. I think content generation is what we're all here to do. And so I want to talk a little bit about how we get that done, because without the brain trust, the senior leadership, if you will, of our facility, we wouldn't be able to get this done. And over here to my left is the managing editor, Rob Newman. Say hi, Rob.
Hello.
Glad to have you.
Thank you.
I don't want to sound like I'm being formal, really. We're rolling with this. And then next to him is the editor-in-chief, Doug Stange, also producer of the television show.
Yeah.
Okay, I've got that right.
Yep.
He's been here for 175 years. We're
almost 50.
Almost 50. And then next to him is Jim Nagy, who is our art director, does a lot of the layout. You've been here about a year now?
About a year now.
Okay. Yep. Took the helm and has been doing some good stuff. And then the lovely young lady on the far right is my daughter. Taylor, has worked very hard to make an appearance on the cover of our magazine. And it's actually Bass Guide. And we're going to tell that story because her smart mouth kind of got her in trouble with that fish, and it ended up being her biggest bass of the year. So it's kind of a fun story that I'm going to let her tell. But the goal here is we're going to kind of preview magazines. We're a little behind if we were to set a schedule on this, but we've got the May edition of In-Fisherman magazine right there, and we also have Bass Guide. And we're right now at the tail end of March. April starts next week, and we wanted to kind of give you a preview of these magazines and give you an excuse to go pick them up off the newsstand. And most especially, I like getting magazines in the mail. I still get some magazine subscriptions. It's really a prescription. I need to have it. It's important, and I recommend you do the same. These are inexpensive. I mean, I remember I used to have to save my pennies from my paper route. I had a job to fill out these little cards when I was a kid, and it was something I look forward to every month. So look into that. But Doug, let's start with you. I want you to give me a general synopsis, if you will, when you make these assignments. When do you do that? And you have a crew that has been with you for a long time that produces these stories. Start out with that.
Well, I think we have the finest group of writers ever in the history of fishing, to be very frank. So I think about half of them are actually in one Hall of Fame or another. And so there's probably about 10 that we tie into, and we can talk about, there's so many different, could go for an hour on all these different things. So, but it's an extremely talented group. And so it's like in the old days, I coached baseball for 10 years in high school before I did what I'm doing here now. Mm-hmm. And so you've got your team there, and you know how they play. In this case, you know how they write, you know what their strengths are. And so when you sit to make these assignments, you have this wonderful opportunity to draw on all of these characters that have this unique insight into fishing. A lot of them are fishery scientists. That's been an important connection to In-Fisherman over the years. Mm-hmm. Fishery scientists write well. They think well. They're used to a little controversy here and there, and that whole thing. So, but the whole thing about putting the magazine together, typically we make assignments. I make assignments, well, right now. So we're in March. So typically that would be when we make the assignments for the coming year. So 2025, made the Bass Guide assignments and a little bit else, but we'll finish now with the magazine here in the next little bit. So,
well, you're ahead of time, and I think that you probably have to keep your finger on the pulse of what's going on in the industry, knowing if you're making assignments for next year, something that might be relevant right now may not be as forefront next year. So how do you kind of mitigate making sure you're relevant?
Well, that's it goes back to the team once again. You give them the assignments, they're going to have time to tinker with it. They get a working title. They don't get something that's insistent on. So they have a whole year to toy with this topic, and they always do a good job because they're exceptional in their own field. So for so long, for example, Steve Quinn was our senior editor, and he handled most of the bass stuff. So that kept me from having to dig into the bass stuff, and the rest of us, he handled most of that most of the time, although we also try to stay on top of what's happening in all of these different parts of the industry.
So you also have Matt Straw. We've got Dan Johnson. Steve Ryan contributes here. Dan Anderson. A handful of others. Let's see. The one that caught my eye here was the Matt Straw story. So Steve seems to handle largemouth stuff. Matt seems to handle smallmouth stuff. So do they have like a field of expertise that you tend to keep them in, or do they bounce across those lines?
Well, they're both exceptional multi-species fishermen, especially Matt. So Matt could do all of the largemouth stuff too if we needed him to, and he does from time to time, just as Corey Schmidt does. And of course, Hal Schramm is an exceptional resource in that regard. So we've got lots of talent in lots of different areas. But yeah, Matt's been with us, was a editor here for probably, I don't know, was it 20 years maybe?
Yeah, 20 years about. Yep.
So starting in about 1989, in the office here, worked with us closely. And then we did some downsizing for, one reason or another. And so, but these are all field editors now.
Well, it's great that they're still in the fold because they still participate. And I think what really is nice about every page in these magazines is, they're produced by guys that love to fish. And it's not that is a waning thing in the industry, but there are participants in media nowadays that are not capable of throwing a bait caster or fly casting or whatever. So, these guys are on the water. I've seen the pictures they send in, and it's, they're busy doing that kind of stuff. It's probably it probably keeps them pretty busy. I mean, they have other things going on, but I can imagine having to write 7, 8, 9 stories a year for you especially would be a tall task because you don't want to. Nobody comes up short.
And you know how difficult writing can be.
That's right.
You write. You know how that is.
I scribble a little bit. So when these stories come in, you field these, right, Rob? They come into you for the most part, or do they come to both of you?
They'll come to both of us, but right now Rob is handling the final editing on everything. So he's the expert when it comes right down to crunch time.
Yeah. So
tell me about your education. This is something that's always has interested me.
Oh, well, I started out in the fisheries science field. So I went to school, got my degree in fisheries science, then my master's and PhD in fisheries as well. Worked as a professor researcher for 10 years, 10, 12 years, and then came on board with In-Fisherman after that. So.
And you've been all over the place. Texas, the Dakotas, right? Out east?
Yeah, Texas, Connecticut, South Dakota, Illinois. Yep. So seen a lot of different kinds of fisheries and tried to do as much fishing in those places too that I could. So
well, every place presents unique opportunities, especially when it comes to collecting all this stuff and knowing what's relevant. So when you're working on these pieces, I know something that we have to do generally is you'll flip through here and you'll see there's sidebars included sometimes. What is your plan of attack if we have a story come in, we feel like it's fairly complete, but it needs a little something that we could kind of put together? How do you like to do that?
Yeah, every story just needs a good balance to it to tell that story, and not only content-wise and information-wise, but also visually. And that's where Jim comes into play in his critical role as art director. So when a story comes in, you obviously have the words that you work with, but also you want to make sure that there's a nice suite of images to go along with it, photography. Sidebars oftentimes break up a story and add a really cool special interest segment to it that draws readers in. And those are nice to highlight particular things and topics that go along with the story.
Well, a lot of times the writers send a feature in with a sidebar or two.
Absolutely,
and that's a nice breakout.
Absolutely.
And let's talk a little bit about your through the year collection process. If you're, I don't need you to give me your file type or how you do that, but you have a lot of work coming in at once. And Jim, we've been talking about this too. We just got through our marathon, right? Our tough time of year where we have multiple issues going to press. How do you keep track of all that?
Yeah, it's just organization, I guess. Organization over the years, and of course, working with great writers that are organized and supply the elements that you could really work with. And if there's a hole that you need to fill, you go find it. We just have a vast, almost 50 years worth of material that we can go back and look in the archives for images and just various things to help complete these stories. But at any given time, I think I counted last winter, or early spring, I guess it was last winter, last late fall, we were working on about 31 different stories at one time. And they're all at different stages. Some are just coming in as raw copy, some are in intermediate stages, some are final stages, some are going to press. So at every step along the way, there's another look and another look and another fine tune and another look, and eventually, you'll end up with the final copy.
Do you feel like that I know that we have a stressful portion of the year, and I think we're all involved to a certain extent. What is the driving force behind getting that done effectively? What inner workings do you have in your mind and your heart and all that stuff to, hey, we're cramped, we're working 60 hours this week, we're going to do it next week too. How do you keep moving forward? Because I want everybody's answer. Start with you.
Well, we love fishing,
yeah,
and I think it all starts there. So, if you're putting in extra hours doing something you love and you love the fishing part of it, then that makes life a lot easier and a lot more rewarding when it comes to that.
What's your perspective on that?
I rely totally on these two guys right now.
At least he's honest.
I did that. I've done what they did for 35 years, and so I'm more involved with television. So that takes a lot of my time. From time to time, at least. I still try to write for the magazine. I write the opening column. I do the adventure section. I work on new products, and then I keep on top of the assignments and that kind of thing. But when it comes right down to the crunch time, these two guys are the main players.
Yeah, the work mules right here.
Oh,
you handle some heavy lifting, and this was your. Were you here for it last year?
No,
the marathon.
When I started in May 1st. So things kind of were just at the tail end of everything. So we were kind of at an easy part, and that's coming up now that we've got the multiple publications done. But it's this is a good time.
There were a couple nights you and I were ready to crack open a bottle of bourbon, and I understand that. But how do you get through? What pushes you through?
I mean, I've been doing this for 39 years. I have never missed a deadline in my life, and I'm certainly not going to start at this point. And I've always been driven by deadlines, and I don't miss them. So whatever it takes to get those out the door, we're going to do it. So if it's putting in a few late nights, so be it.
Yeah.
So, but it's just, and like Rob said, I absolutely love fishing and love everything about our publication. And I used to do some illustrations for In-Fisherman back 20-some years ago. And it was a dream just to even have something published in it. And now to be the art director is just, it's a dream come true. So, yeah.
Well, you guys do a good job.
Oh,
thanks for waiting on me. I'm usually the last one to get my junk in.
And that team effort and working with people for a long time, you almost have like a telepathy. You kind of know what the other person's sort of thinking at times. It just helps things go smoothly, and you're all on the same page for the most part. So,
Doug, talk about the cover. I know that everybody that's familiar with In-Fisherman knows that we have for a very long time used Larry Topol's art. It's beautiful. It's capturing. Obviously we're not gonna be able to do that forever, but talk about a little bit of that. I guess the first time you tried it, and then kind of bring us to current about how we have continued that theme for so long.
Boy, it's a long story. So, and it starts before I actually got here. I've been writing since 1977, and that's about when Topol started. So the story goes that Ron Linder discovered Larry writing for a periodical in the Detroit area, which is where he was working at the time in agency work for the auto industry, and saw some of the illustrations and decided this was going to be our cover artist. Before that time, they were using the typical, photos and that kind of thing. So Larry became our cover artist. Over the years, the art changed quite a bit. We could go through that. But it was a development along the way. And Ron Linder worked with Larry for a long time. So the tradition was for Ron to make an assignment and Larry to do the That did not always go well.
We'll tell that story eventually. There's a picture here that illustrates that.
Yeah. So anyway, at one point, it finally became apparent, and they were late oftentimes. Larry was late with the art because he didn't want Ron to tinker with the art. So he knew that if he sent it in late, Ron wouldn't have time to tinker with it. And so it wasn't going well. And so at one point, about 1989, I think it was, I took over doing the magazine and the covers and doing the cover assignment. So basically, when you put the magazine together, you've got this potpourri of articles, and so you pick out one article, and that you decide is going to be the theme for the cover. So at that point, I'm looking at a cover over here with a catfish on it. So in the magazine itself, you've got the catfish article, and you know what the catfish article is going to be. So I sit down and I write Larry a note saying we want a channel catfish, action river, this kind of bait. And so then he would sit and he would paint that, and he'd send us. And from that point on, we were never in jeopardy of being late, thank goodness. And so these paintings, they're still the most unique things, I think, artistically like this anyway. And it was always based on the fact that Larry was, in the early days, a diver. So he shot all of this stuff with Nikonos cameras. We did that early stuff too. So that kind of started it all. So he did paint from the perspective of what he shot to begin with. That was where this all started. So he would have a photograph, and this photograph that would then become, is it mostly acrylic painting?
His was oils.
Oil?
Yeah, oil.
Okay.
Yep.
I thought there was some acrylics in there.
There's probably some for some side articles and such, but
okay. Well, so that's the process whereby we got all of these.
Did he have a month
covers.
turnaround time? Was it that fast?
I'd say 3 weeks typically.
Wow.
Yeah. So
I can't even get a story done in 3 weeks. So a paint is
amazing.
Well, that's not true, but anyway. So yeah, but he was. He's not just good at doing these. I mean, he's a cartoonist. He's just a talented individual, and this comes to the point where some 6 or 7 or 8 or 10 years ago, Larry is at the age where he is no longer painting. Mm-hmm. So these covers that you see today, we have like a 30-year stock of his stuff that we have backlog, and that is now what we're doing. So we are recycling some of these covers from time to time, and the assignments or the covers are still relative to something that's inside the magazine. So that was always an important part of the thematically speaking, to In-Fisherman. So that continues. So we try to stay away from, using a cover if it has been used like 10 years ago. So that's probably the sort of the criteria that we use. So Larry is still alive. I haven't talked to him in a couple of years now, but he's not painting anymore. So, so that's where we're at. But these, so the guides are different. So here's the guide, and we use photographs on the guides. Oh, you've got okay. So we use photographs on the guides to keep a little bit of distance between the two periodicals. Mm-hmm. So we don't want, because they do go on the newsstand at the same time. And the topal art is more distinctively different than the photographs. So we try to keep that sort of separated. So
well, the guides they're not a part of the subscription, correct? Those are newsstand sales.
Right.
Yep.
So if you're looking to pick these up, there's a lot of locations to do that. But I think I have read bass guides since I was in high school. I mean, I can remember. Or it was Bass Insider or something like that earlier, or was it the
Bass Guide has always been Bass
Guide? Okay.
But Walleye Insider,
That's
there was
right.
another magazine.
Okay. So there are a few guides you can still pick up, but let's talk about this Bass Guide cover for a moment. Is that Spencer Semplowski? Is that how you say his name? I don't know him personally, but I know his work, and the man can catch big fish.
He's an exceptional angler and guide.
A great photographer.
And I don't know him personally either, but I know him from talking to him. So
well, the other part of this cover, I want to tell this story quick. So I have been sending pictures of my kids to supplement my work my entire life, and they have appeared in many a magazine. I think both kids have showed up in Bassmaster magazine. They've showed up in freelance work in the game and fish department. Like they don't know how many times they've been published.
Oh, I didn't know that.
But my daughter over here, Taylor, is at the age now where she sees value in that and has been wanting to work with me to take pictures. And this particular day, we went to a local lake to catch a largemouth, and I was going to take the camera along. We weren't out to shoot a particular fish, but she was using a bait caster, a medium heavy rod with braid, and we were using a 1/2 ounce jig with a bunker hog. I know you like those. That's our trailer. And she casts out, and it's a spot where I knew there were a bunch of fish. And why don't you tell me what happened? Give the short version.
Well, first off, you've been catching fish, and I wouldn't catch one. You kept on, cast and you get one. I'm like, what the heck?
Well, of course.
Why am I not catching anything?
Well,
so he'd tell me what I need to listen for.
That's because he's fronting the boat on you.
Yeah.
Whatever. So he would tell me that it would go da-da, and then it would take off. And now there's rocks where we were fishing. And so it would go da-da, but it's just a rock.
Well, the rocks don't usually pull back. But okay, you were running your mouth, which I deserve. I did a lot of that growing up, and I could see her rod tip load up. And we're talking about it.
But it would do that for a rock too. At least I thought so. So I'm over here like, oh, it did the da-da-da. It's gonna, is it a fish? I didn't set the hook. I would just be like, is it gonna do anything? And then
there it was. And it almost pulled the rod out of her hand, and she fumbled with it, grabbed it, set the hook. And I know that if you're not like the parent of the girl on the picture, you can't see what I see is total, it's definitely not embarrassment, but the smile indicates to me that Dad was right. I see that in that smile. And so when I see this, I'm proud of that. But Taylor, I think that was probably your biggest bass of the year. It was a 4-pounder anyways.
Yeah, nice one.
Yeah.
And down in the grass, and why we talked about that in this magazine. So we did make it on the cover. And if you turn into this also worked out for me too, for your oldest brother. I wrote a fall piece in here, and again, I'm bragging. I know you guys are all talking about important stuff, but I'm bragging. On page 58, my son Tommy made the magazine. So we had a little bit of fun last fall catching some fish.
And you, Thomas, later on in the same article. So it's kind of
He's not in there, is he?
Kind of the Allen family
you guys
edition.
Can do a better job on that. But hey, you know what? It's fun. I think there's value. My point is even this generation, who is very digitally driven, they're very they don't get face to face with friends as often as we did, or go outside and play in the dirt. I mean that's a change, but there's still some kind of value, and it's inherent for them to appear on a hard copy piece of editorial. They all get a kick out of that. So there's been talk for a long time, Doug. We've all lived through this seemingly inevitable die off of print. Like we've been told for years, print is going away and digital is going to take over. And if that's going to happen, it's yet to happen. I think we still hold a very viable place in the print edition, the hard copy edition of fishing editorial. And I think humans like something tangible to look at. And this goes to your artistic ability, your desire to add relevant content, and Rob's scientific drive to edit and publish, get all this together. The collection of work comes from a team, and it comes out in hard copy that you can put on the table. I don't know about you guys, but one of the best compliments I ever got is, I read your stories on the toilet. I'm not even angry to hear that. I'm like, I'm just glad to hear that somebody other than my mom is reading my work. So I'm hopeful that hard copy magazines continue to, especially in the outdoor space, there seems to be a place for it.
Yeah. I have a bet or two to still collect on that, because 15, 20 years ago, I was told in 10 years we wouldn't have a print publication anymore.
Yeah, well,
but here it is.
Big changes for sure, but the magazines that made it are doing vibrantly now. But they're not as big as they used to be and that kind of thing, but they don't need to be. Then it's a quick read.
Do you talk about the change in feature story length? I remember there was a day, it was like page after page after page of a story, but they're definitely a little bit shorter bite. They're still over 2,000 words, but
yeah. Well, we were doing magazines in the 80s that were 300 and some pages.
Wow.
So you had all kinds of room for all kinds of stuff. And then you just become more judicious in how you write and that kind of thing. So the typical long article these days is 4 magazine pages. So what, 2,500 words?
Yeah, that would be a long four pager.
And then depending on how many photos or illustrations are in it. So we went from that drastic overload to where we're at now, which is a very judicious look at these topics. So in each magazine, we try to have, we do have a largemouth. We promise a largemouth article, a smallmouth article, a walleye article, a panfish article of some sort, a catfish article. What I missed? Pike muskie. Pike muskie.
Trout,
and then,
salmon. Yeah.
Well, we don't promise that, but we try to get them in there if we do. So then the columns, and of course the most important column of all, Northwood Dock. We learned our lesson there 25 years ago.
That's right.
Where we get down to the end of the magazine, and many times you have to make a decision about you got to drop something. So we made the mistake of dropping Doc.
And you heard about that?
Oh, 1,000, maybe 1,000 letters. So it was like
and phone ringing and
Yeah.
everything dinging like alarms.
Did you only do it once, or was it a couple times?
once.
Just one time.
Only once.
But everybody needs a reminder from time to time.
Well, that's fair, and I mean it. I do want to tell my nipple story in this one at some point.
Is it clean?
I got a suic stuck in my nipple, but I don't want to give it away. But we do need to make for some great illustrations.
Get Peter right on that one.
Yeah, right.
That would have been an easy fix for me, I can tell you that.
I know. Well, so let's talk about the division here of if I hear, especially on social media, people complain about advertising. I think this is a discussion we ought to have briefly. Like these cost money. It is not free for us to produce. We all have to make a living. Our advertisers, our sponsors, everybody that's involved, it's a contribution. What is our overarching goal of percentage of editorial versus ads? Do we have a number?
Boy, you got me now.
50-50?
No.
Less than that?
Less than that. I mean, it used
60-40.
We've seen people say that it has it's mostly ads. It has 50, but it's I can't remember the last time it was always dominated by content. And not advertisement.
Right.
But it varies. It varies by the issue too. Sometimes the spring issues are a little more
Right.
Heavier with advertising because that's a season when companies want to reach anglers, and it just depends on whether it's ice or open water and seasonality to it. So.
Well, beautiful thing is you can turn a page.
Yeah.
All right.
If you don't want to look at it, I think there's.
But the whole formula, was always based on, magazines are a product of, the money comes from subscriptions, it comes from newsstand, and then a vital part is the advertising.
Yeah.
Certainly is, and we've got partners we've worked with for a long time in here. But I want to ask a couple questions about a couple stories. And Rob, one that we worked on together is the spoonbill piece, and this is in the May edition of In-Fisherman. There's the third eye of a spoonbill.
Yeah.
What is that?
Well, that is just a part of their physiology. They have a kind of where their bill meets their skull. There's an opening that is just a remnant of that species where it receives. They can detect light with it, so it's like a window, and it's could be used to just detect day versus night, when it's getting darker, when it's getting lighter. It could have to do with photo periods throughout the year, all kinds of things. So some of it we don't understand, but they have done some tests on it, and they do know it's related to light reception. Yeah.
Would you say that the spoonbill, the paddlefish, or whatever your phrase is, your term, is that one of the larger mysterious fish that we have in our waters? Is there less known about it than others, or do you think that it's pretty up there with our general knowledge?
No, I think it's kind of an interesting, curious fish. I mean, it's one that people don't catch regularly. It's kind of a specialized fishery. And of course, they're unique looking. They can grow very large. They can live a long time. So they kind of join that group of other fish that we often like to write about, like like gar and sturgeon and so on. Some of those curious fish that are really cool. You know, they're just as much as part of the North America's awesome fishing landscape as a lot of the other species, but they just they're not as popular.
They're weird.
Yeah.
And I think we could come up with a lot of theories as to what that bill is for. But in this article, we talk a little bit about preserving the bill if you are going to catch one and keep one. I think it's a fair expectation that anglers are trophy hunters to an extent, and they want something to kind of represent that. And in the case you don't release a fish or it's not releasable, this is a pretty cool way to preserve that.
Yeah.
And I like trophy stuff. I'm kind of into that. But having that bill preserved that way, and you can actually, I want to encourage you to do this. Scan the QR code. We conveniently put that in there so that you can use your smartphone to go read an article about preserving the bill and saving it in your man cave.
Yep. And it looks really neat. It looks really neat.
It looks like it'd be fragile.
It's skeletonized. It's a cool looking piece to have.
Have you caught one?
We have. We've done some TV segments on them.
I think that's the only time we've ever shot
that.
So we should do that again.
Yeah, they're amazingly where we fished in that situation. There were days where you had to harvest a fish, or there were days that were catch and release. And some people might think that catch and release doesn't sound right with paddlefish because of the way you fish them, but they're very hardy. They were very highly releasable, and on the harvest days, that's when you might be able to keep your trophy bill.
Yeah, well, some people may not know how you're catching them.
Yeah,
let's talk about that. It's semi-controversial because it's mostly snagging, right?
Yes,
all snagging.
Yeah, I don't know of another way because they won't eat a bait.
Yep. It's just basically a rig that's weighted that you can cast with a hook, and you're just making sweeping rod movements in hopes that you're going to hook up.
It's no picnic. I've done it. Yeah. Did you receive any flack when you ran that segment? Did anybody call in and complain?
Not that I recall specifically.
No. I think if it's presented as a harvest, issue, it's just like everything else. So,
well, and that's important.
We don't write about our pike spearing, but we're not against it. So just a reasonableness to the harvest.
Well, let me break in here. Total side note. We'll come back to this, but I had pickled pike last weekend. Yeah, it was unbelievable.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
It makes a guy want to pick up a spear. Like, I'm going to put Tommy to work.
We don't need a spear. And there's lots and lots of small pike. So,
well, that was delicious. Anyway, so the paddlefish thing. Carry on.
I was going to follow up with what Doug mentioned in terms of the harvest, and in the particular fishery we fished, the DNR managed it to have specific harvest days, and you would have a tag that you would have to tag just like you tag a deer. But when you harvested that fish, it just didn't get harvested for the sake of harvest. The state worked in cooperation with some of the other local organizations where they actually would clean that paddlefish for you. They harvested the eggs and made caviar, and it was very good. And they would sell that caviar, and the proceeds from those sales went back into paddlefish conservation, research, and management. So it was kind of a cool cycle of the management of a fishery and how harvest and catch and release are both, hand in hand in helping that fishery.
How long does it take a fish? How old is a fish that is in that 40 to 50 pound range? Do you have any idea? I mean, they're pretty old.
Paddlefish, a guess would be 20, but I'm not.
Yeah. They could have different growth rates depending on where they are. But
okay. They're a fascinating fish, like sturgeon, paddlefish, and really catfish. I dare I say rough fish. That's not the right word for these things. I know we don't like to use that, but I think they're considered that by a lot of anglers. But each one kind of has a fascinating component to it that I think the paddlefish certainly fits that bill for me. But anyway, there is some good stuff in here. Bass Guide. So when let's go through that quickly. When we want to inspire people to fish for bass with the Bass Guide. Same with the Walleye Guide and everything else that we put together. It's important that we're giving people relevant information, something they can learn and take to the water. And so it makes sense, right, to publish that in March. Because you have a whole season, I think, across the country.
It's newsstands March 26th.
So just recently there.
Right.
But I kind of shook things up. I did want to write a fall story. You graciously let me do that. But I want this to have some shelf life. So I thought it's going to sit on the top of the pile on the back of your toilet a little bit longer.
Yeah,
Maybe if you can get through the seasons with it. Well, I used to read these cover to cover when I got them, but.
Well, they're meant to be a seasonal guide to fishing. So an inspiration, as you said.
Yeah, something that can stay on a coffee table or something throughout the season, pick up and read here and there. And
In the cabin.
yeah.
Well, you kind of rehashed this F plus L plus P equals S thing. Explain that to me. What is, to anybody that hasn't heard of that formula that was developed here, what is that all about?
Well, that was the original In-Fisherman teaching formula. So you have to understand the fish, which brings you to being able to decipher where they might be, so the location, so F plus L plus P, which is the presentation part. So then you add the presentation aspect to it, and that if you put that all together in the proper way, it leads you to be a fishing, a success at fishing. So it was always the F plus L plus P equals S, success fishing formula. And when this is basically the way everyone, you might not go through that exact thinking process today, but it's still the same process, no matter how you get at it. So like in the old days, even most of the bass guys would admit that was the formula by which they learned how to fish. Mm-hmm. So there's lots of different ways to get there today, but that's still the In-Fisherman formula. So
one of the things I've noticed, I've been able to work with a lot of tremendous anglers over the years. I talked to a guy just a couple days ago. His name's Drew Gregory. He won the Bassmaster Kayak Series Championship, which took place 2 days prior to the Classic this year. And in a world that is full of modern electronics and expensive gear, he continues to dominate without any electronics on his boat. And he continues to dominate with simple gear. They were on 10 Killer Lake in Oklahoma, and actually he used a motor, which he begrudgingly admitted. He had to use a motor for the sake of the time restraints he was in, so he put a Torpedo electric motor on his boat. And he mostly paddles. So that's the exception for his style of fishing, but when I talked to him and asked about his process, he referenced that formula. He goes, I remember that back in the day, and he does it across the board. He writes it down prior to going to a fishery, and he said, if I just have a plan, and if I'm going to fish in this area with that lure, I can look at watercolor, I can check a buoy to get weather conditions or water conditions and temperature, and he'll put all that together, and he says within 2 or 3 presentations, he'll have it figured out, which is using that formula and including all the information. I think we do it subconsciously, but a guy that takes the time to write it down is pretty impressive. Yeah,
well, in the old days, that was the formula for putting articles together. So you would sit and you would say, well, okay, so pre-spawn walleyes. So you have to understand what's happening with the fish, water temperature, photo period, where the fish are, that leads you to where the fish are going to be, where are they going to be spawning at, and then when does the spawn actually happen? For most fish, the spawn period is the central marker in the year for that's where everything begins. So that's the one time of the year where they're pushed into an area where they might not spend any time the rest of the year. So it's kind of a marker point.
Well, and as speaking of how the year goes on, explain to me a little bit about the cycle of magazines. It is not a one a month kind of thing anymore. So I know we're getting through our spring and early summer editions. Rob, explain the year to me so that we know when to expect what's coming next.
Yeah. So we're usually working on magazines about 3 months ahead of time, I'd say, on average. So it is strange to be in August and working on Ice Guide. Sometimes we forget what season it is, or even what month it is.
We're not getting ice fishing pictures in August, that's for sure. Better have them done beforehand.
But there's usually 1 or 2 in the mill going on at one time, and we're about 3 months ahead of time.
So Ice Guide hits December, and then so let's start with our first spring issue.
Well, Ice Guide hits, the first ice guide is the 1st of October.
Yep.
1st of October.
And the
then-
second one is
Yeah, the second one
is
is
December.
2 editions.
Yeah.
All right. So In-Fisherman magazine starts the year off with the winter edition, right? We do December, January, February.
Actually, the March issue is issue number 1.
Issue number 1.
Yep, and then there are 7 issues throughout the year.
Walk us through those.
So there's March, April, May, then there's June, July, August, September is a single issue. October, November is a single issue, and then the winter issue is December, January, February.
Yeah, I think March, April is together.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. March, April, and then May.
Okay. And then the guides, we have bass guide, we have walleye guide, 2 ice guides. Is there another one in there? There was a catfish guide.
Catfish guide stopped this year.
So, and you mentioned about the guides being available on newsstand, and we oftentimes get questions from people. They'll write in and say, "Well, I can't find it on my newsstand, but it's also available at the newsstand at osg.com." So you get a newsstand at osg.com.
Yeah. So you
That's where
can
you
buy
can
and
pick
have it delivered, right?
Yes.
Okay. That is a good
guides.
way to do it. So it's kind of like a subscription.
Yeah.
Only not. So as the year goes on, we are out looking for new pieces of content. I think the television show drives a lot of that content. But ultimately, our goal is to inspire and educate people, and that's never changed. What do you feel is the goal with each and every magazine, Doug, that has never changed and has been the central focus?
Well, it's always a timely look at what's happening in the fishing world. And we love everything about fishing. And I mean, from the catching to, and I love the harvest part of it myself also. So we used to do recipes in the magazine. We still write about selective harvest as a vital part of, so it's everything that has to do with anything about, has to do with fishing, from, just sitting back and dreaming about it to begin with, to actually getting out there and then putting all of this stuff that we have to choose from, luckily today, into play. And that's a big part of it too. So there's this wide world of things to do that have to do with all of these fish.
And we're pretty lucky that so much of it's right here in Minnesota too. I don't know there's a lot of places that has the robust diversity of fisheries like we've got. I mean, we can drive 5 minutes one way to a walleye lake, 5 minutes the next way and catch catfish and everything in between.
Yep.
It's a great multi-species state.
Mm-hmm. It's a lot of
Location.
fun. Although this last snow that we got was not happy about that. But well, guys, I want to do more of this, and before we shut this down for the day, Doug, talk a little bit about, without giving away too many details, what can we expect in the June issue? What's some stuff we're looking forward to in the June issue?
Well, you get all of those fish species that we always promise. And Rob, you'd actually probably know more specifically than I actually would.
Sneak peek.
Yeah, well, there's a catfish article has some interesting and things about catching bait, which is critical for things like blue cats and flatheads. So there's some things there. On the shoot, I got to look at my
Jim, are you nodding because you know the answer?
No.
No, we're more.
As we work on this,
fundamentally-
we just kind of zoom through and we send them back and forth. So it's
Well, while he's recalling, I do have a question. Do you feel, I guess even when I was an editor of magazine material, I often found myself kind of consuming some of the information just by nature. Do you find yourself doing that too?
I do that all the time, because to visually come up with the right look, I read every article and then try to pick, visually what makes sense with that article. So you end up reading it a few times and you're like, oh, I need to try this next time I'm in my fishing league.
Yeah,
So that
well,
kind of thing.
You
So
put it into play, but also being a fisherman, like you want other fishermen to feel the fishing feel within that article, and so visually you're creating something that draws people in and pushes them
Absolutely.
paragraph to paragraph. That's not he's an art director, right? So that's a title that represents exactly what you're doing. You're trying to get people drawn into each piece.
Absolutely, yeah. And, Rob and I were talking about it. Even when we do charts and graphs, we want them to look compelling and cool, so people are actually reading them. I mean, if it's boring, people are just going to blow right by them. So even that, we put a lot of thought into. Those have to look, appealing. So people are like, oh, what's this?
And we were just right before we did this podcast, we were working on some of those chart elements for the largemouth bass article, which is going to be a look at some issues and answers regarding largemouth bass management today. So that's going to be an interesting one for readers to take a look at. And walleye, there's a pretty cool article written by contributor Gord Pizer on the connections between bait fish and walleye location and presentation. So that's going to be a good one for anglers to learn a little bit more about those forage connections.
Well, it's always evolving, and I often have wondered how we continue to produce relevant information, TV show episode to TV show episode, magazine edition to the next, but there is a constant evolution of presentations and fish locations, and I think it would be hard to keep up. But the reason it's relevant is because our contributors are on the water the entire year.
Yeah, it's subtle differences in presentation or subtle differences in thinking. That's what makes up the world today.
Well, and breaking everything down into small individual parts and looking at that part as a scientific way, I think, is very intriguing.
And
catching bait, I've not seen a lot of articles about that. You have my attention on that.
Yeah, well, it's about throwing cast nets and that kind of thing, which I've never actually gotten into.
I've tried. It doesn't.
Watch your head with the weights.
Yeah, I wouldn't do a good job.
Well, we don't use many of them up here. But
no,
down south.
Our friend Chris Winchester on a recent shoot did a fantastic job filling up the cooler with all sorts of. We side note, again, I'm totally off on a tangent here, but he threw that net a bunch of times, and I would say for the most part it was mullet.
Yes.
There was some occasional shad. But then he did catch, and it wasn't real big, but a beautiful male bluegill in salt water.
Yeah.
What is he doing there? How did he get in there?
He got in the wrong direction.
He was in one of those river backwaters.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously they have some level of tolerance to deal with. I mean, it's brackish. It wasn't totally salt, but
Yeah, there's water flushing back.
he was at the boat ramp. He goes, I got a bluegill. And sure enough, here's a funny little bluegill, poor thing. But he ended up in the jaws of a big blue catfish later.
Yeah.
So that was well put. Well, we're going to talk, probably the next time we do this, we'll talk a little bit about the television show for 2025. We've just started filming it. We could probably dig into that, but let's save that for the next episode. But let's do this again. I think this was a good way to preview content that's coming out.
Sure.
What's it going to take for you and your people to start reading magazines? Come on. You need to change the agenda here, change the whole motion of the ocean.
Honestly, I have no idea.
I'm putting you on the spot with a funny
have no
question.
idea.
Give your eyes a break from the screen.
Yeah,
Well, I mean, something online, which there is.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
I love seeing the Instagram things. That's what I do. Like, I go through and I'll
read the social
see
media
that,
stuff.
but-
Well, and there's nothing wrong with that. We haven't even talked about the digital component to what we do, but I think you said earlier a lot of magazines that have survived are doing very well. But I think the magazines that survived chose to adopt a digital platform
of course.
and make it a component, not a replacement. That's what I
Correct.
think is critical. Have it reflect, have it complement the publication, and I spend a lot of time over there, but that gets to be boring and a lot of button pushing, but I hope the content is engaging. I enjoy making it. So
Another thing to look forward to for June is Matt Straw's piece. He's going to be writing on Ned rigging and some nuances associated with that. We haven't seen that piece yet, but it's good. It'll be a good one if it's from Matt.
That's another story in and of
Yeah.
itself.
Yeah.
That I'm hoping we can get Mr. Ned in here to talk to us about his contribution to the Ned rig. So it might be a challenge, but we'll see. I would love to hear how that happened.
Steve Ryan will write about catching giant pike on hard baits. And, of course, there's the columns. There's always the adventure column, the noteworthy new column, Northwood Dock, all the stuff that rounds it out.
The good stuff. Well, thank you from Rob, from Doug, from Jim, and, of course, my sweet daughter, Taylor. I'm Thomas Allen. You're listening to In-Fisherman Storyline. This has been a hard copy edition. We'll catch you here next time.